Mr. Brown, one of the things that strikes me about this debate is when I tell many people in the business community, I tell some of our editorial writers that I'm firmly opposed to this agreement, there's a regular refrain that they have. They say to me, Mr. Davis, why are you against globalization? They say, why are you against trade? And it strikes me that that is such an enormously false way to frame this argument. To say that someone is against globalization if they oppose this treaty is a real misstatement of what we're debating about and what we'll be voting on 1 week from now. And I want to talk about that for a moment. There are some of us in this chamber who have voted for every trade agreement that we've seen since we've been here. I've voted for agreements with Australia, with Morocco, with Chile, with Singapore. I'm someone who firmly believes in this modern economy that we cannot disengage ourselves from the rest of the world. And I by no means subscribe to the label of being anti-trade or being anti-globalization. But I think that there is another way. There is a possibility, if we're thoughtful enough and serious enough about this economy and our obligations, to build a trade policy that actually prods countries around this world to change. There's a possibility of building a trade policy that elevates conditions around the world. And I would submit that there are two kinds of trade policies. There is one set of policies that challenges the rest of the world to rise to a higher standard. And there's another set of trade policies that takes the world as it is and doesn't seek to move it, doesn't seek to bend it, doesn't seek to change it. And I and so many of us believe in the first kind. I believe in a set of principles that say that we can use our trade as we occasionally use our economic might, as we occasionally use our political might to improve conditions. The reality is that if this agreement is somehow passed next week, despite the great opposition to it, it will open up a new low-wage market, and it will say to 5 countries in Central America and to the Dominican Republic that your low-wage conditions, your failure to protect your workers, your failure to protect your women from discrimination laws, your failure to prevent children from working is acceptable in the community of nations. It's acceptable in the economic community of nations. And I remember, as you do, when President Bush gave his second inaugural just a few months ago, most of that inaugural is devoted to the proposition that as a superpower, we have an ability to change the character of this world. Much of that inaugural was dedicated to the idea that as a superpower, we have the ability to challenge this world and the most repressive countries in this world to move in a better direction. Here we stand just 7 months later, and that challenge is not being posed to the House, not by the administration. That challenge is not being posed to us. And all of a sudden, the same president who told us 7 months ago that we have it in our power to move this world toward reform apparently doesn't believe that we can do so when it comes to the dollars and cents that people earn every day. Apparently doesn't think that we can do so when it comes to the quality of community that people live in every day around the world. There's a very cruel argument that I've heard in the last several days I want to mention to you. I've heard it said that if you do not support CAFTA, that somehow you are not standing by the countries in Central America. I've heard it said that if you don't support CAFTA, that you're somehow abandoning these poor, miserable nations and that you're somehow leaving them to just be cut adrift. What I don't understand, Mr. Brown, is how we can say that we are standing by the CAFTA countries when we aren't standing by millions of children, 14 million in the whole region, who are between 5 and 14, who got up and went to work this morning and who are being put in bed tonight and will go back to work tomorrow morning. I don't understand how we can say that we are somehow standing by Central America when we can't stand by the rights of women in these countries. I don't understand how we can say that we are standing by Central America when we can't stand for the rights of the voiceless and those who work and want to express their political beliefs or their desire for better conditions in the workplace and can be fired because of those opinions. I don't see how we can say that we are standing by Central America when we are leaving it unchallenged to change itself. That's what this debate is about. This is about, to use a word that is used on both sides of this aisle very freely, this is a debate about values. Because I define values as what we demand from others, what we demand from ourselves, and the vision that we offer to others. This agreement offers such a narrow vision it offers such a limited notion of what our economy can be. It tells us that we can roll back our trade deficit on the backs of unskilled workers around the world. It tells us that we can somehow improve certain industries and the profits of certain industries by diverting them to low-wage economies. And it somehow says that we can trade off the fortunes of our people and the fortunes of other people interchangeably without any higher standard to lift them both. Another point that I want to address. So many of the editorials that I've seen on this issue have a certain bloodless quality to them because they say, if you believe in globalization, yes, you have to accept that there are winners and losers, and there will be more winners than losers, and the losers simply have to get over it. They simply have to adjust. Well, like Mr. Jones, I represent some of the towns in West Alabama who are full of some of the people who will lose. Families who today were working in textile companies, apparel companies, hosiery companies, who may not be able to work there if this agreement puts a set of forces in place. And I don't think of those people, Mr. Brown, as being losers. I think of them as being families who are struggling to build a future for their families. I think of them as being people who want their kids to be able to come back and work in West Alabama. I think of them as being people who desperately want a better life for themselves and their children, the grandchildren. And I think that we should keep this in mind as I begin to close today. How do we promote and defend a vision to the American people that concedes that so many of us will be losers? How do we promote and defend a vision and a set of values that accepts that so many of our people will be left to fall behind under the trends that this agreement will set in place, and that so many people in Central America will be left in their substandard condition? There is no wonder why this agreement is struggling to pass Congress. There is no wonder why, if almost any of us went back to our states, we would find either a mystery or we would find outright confusion around CAFTA. The reason the case has not been made is because the American people are tired of being denominated and delineated into winners and losers. They are tired of being told that you may lose, but you have to get over it. And that's the final point at stake here today. Can we build a trade vision which offers a better way for so many workers in our country? Because it's not enough to simply say that, well, there are these abstract benefits that are off in the distance. We have to be able to talk to people in your district, in my district, in Mr. Otter's district, in Mr. Jones's district, Mr. Gould's district. We have to be able to talk to them and say, here's why your Congress is doing this. And right now, we couldn't justify it. Right now, we couldn't say to them that these agreements will create a higher standard of living in America or abroad. Right now, we couldn't say that these conditions will meet the American test of reforming the world for the better. We simply cannot make the case. The administration cannot make the case. So in closing, I simply call on my colleagues tonight, 1 week from now, or 1 week and 1 day from now, when we, in all likelihood, vote on this agreement, to vote on their principles, to vote for trade that has values lying beneath it, to vote for a vision of how we can reform the economies of the world, and not to accept this limited vision. And I'm reminded so often of something that William Jefferson Clinton, who was elected the same year you were to Congress, Mr. Brown, he often said that he was so tired of what was cold-blooded being passed off as courageous in politics. I fear that our indifference to the fortunes of the people who live in these countries, our failure to pry their governments toward reform, looks a lot like that cold-bloodedness that President Clinton was talking about. And it is so wrong for the editorial boards, so wrong for so many lobbies in this city to say that that cold-bloodedness is really courage. It is not courageous, and it will not be courageous to take your voter card and to stand on the floor in the well of this House next week and to vote for an agreement that is so empty and so vacant of values. So I yield back, and I thank you for your good work. Thank our Republican colleagues who are here tonight for joining us in this bipartisan cause, and thank them and hope the American people recognize that this is a critical vote because it is a statement of what kind of community we are and how we exist in the international community of nations.